Hello, I'm Anushka Sarif, and thank you all for joining us today. This is a four-part webinar series, and in the first two webinars, we talked about the overall concept of the three Ps to get better results faster in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, and the first P, the process. So today we'll talk about the second P, which stands for professional. So in a moment, we'll quickly review what the three Ps are, and you can also see our recording of our previous sessions on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. But first, just a bit about us. I'm the head of advisory services at our office, where we provide an end-to-end solution which works especially well for small and medium-sized businesses who want to improve DEI. All of our team members at our office have experiences trying to improve DEI throughout their careers. And in the last 3 years, we've been working together, applying the three Ps and partnering with our customers to build more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplaces. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues, Erica Shorter and Laura Moore, to share some of the stories and experiences as DEI advisors at our office. So thanks, Erica and Laura, for joining me. Okay, so before we get into the meat of this conversation, let's make sure you're familiar with the webinar tool. So this is a 30-minute interactive webinar, and you can use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions or provide inputs throughout the webinar. And lastly, please note this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. Okay, so let's start making sure we're all on the same page about the three Ps and what they are. So the three Ps are a holistic approach where you're not just looking at isolated initiatives or actions, and instead you apply the three Ps, a proven process, professional guidance, and a technology platform. And in the last 3 years, we've been applying this approach. We've seen it deliver results faster than you may think, sometimes in a matter of a few weeks, for small and medium-sized organizations across various industries, including iconic brands, public companies, and nonprofits. Many of these organizations couldn't afford a full-time DEI leader or consultant, or simply didn't know where to start. And then there are organizations that do have a DEI leader, and perhaps have even set up things like employee resource groups or other initiatives, but we're not seeing the benefits, which is consistent with a BCG report from 2019, which surveyed about 16,000 organizations who carried out DEI initiatives and found that 75% of the targeted employees didn't see any benefit. So here's a little about the first P, which we covered in the earlier session last week, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So like any other business objective, we see that having a well-defined process for DEI is most important. And we call it the ACT process, which stands for Align, Connect, and Transform. So notice the order here, it's important. Our experience is you can't successfully connect and engage the organization unless there's alignment on the objectives and why they're important. And only after you have alignment and engagement, you can truly start to transform the organization. All right, so let's talk about the second P, the professional. At our office, our DEI advisors help our customers through the ACT process with the initial effort in the align phase to get feedback from executives and employees and assess the organization's infrastructure, policies, and processes as they relate to creating a culture of inclusion. And this culminates in a DEI plan with actions and success measures. Then our DEI advisors help the organization get on the platform to help engage employees in the connect phase, and finally to be able to plan actions and to track KPIs in the transform phase. So Erica, Laura, and I are going to share some of our experiences during our time at our office, and we thought it would be helpful to break out those stories into the three phases of the ACT process. All right, I'll see you better now. So the first story I'd like to share is actually about a tech organization that we work with. And they started doing DEI efforts and were struggling with the outcomes. They decided to start their DEI efforts by offering DEI training. That's a lot of organizations do. And they searched online and asked about good trainers. And they offered the same training to all their employees, from employees in the field to their engineers and PhDs. And the training ended up causing a lot of turmoil with many disgruntled employees. Some felt it was a waste of time. Some were afraid of loss of opportunities for them. Others thought the training was not enough and didn't go far enough. And so 6 months later, when an employee survey showed little benefit, the company started searching for a better solution with a process to determine the right actions for them and approached us to help them. Erica, do you have a story about the initial phase of the process?
Yes. I worked with a global nonprofit organization, and the employees were frustrated, dissatisfied because the organization grew silent and there were no visible actions after the George Floyd incident. So I, as a DEI advisor, I led the align process, doing that with a series of assessments. So we conducted surveys, we did listening sessions, and a side note, listening sessions they help us hear from the employees who are usually silent, who don't normally speak up. We did executive interviews and we developed a DEI plan. I worked with them to really, customize their DEI plan. And it created a shared vision. And, we were able to align them with a set of key DEI objectives. And afterwards, the DEI director really understood, what we were trying to do. They were happy with it and said that the process actually showed the organization how to align the leadership and where to focus their efforts. So it was really a positive experience.
Yeah, I think so many of our customers just appreciate having a process, right, to follow.
Exactly. Yes.
Laura, what about you?
Yes, I used the align process and connect and transform, but with a retail company I was working with. They had a fairly robust DEI program. They placed priority on it. The problem was nobody knew about it. The customers they were trying to attract, the employees they were trying to retain, the candidates they were trying to hire were not aware of their efforts and priorities they were placing in this space. Their website didn't differentiate themselves at all. It, just sort of read like everybody else. So I worked with them through the align phase, came up with a great DEI plan, gave, comprehensive analytics, and we rolled out our culture app, and people really started engaging on that. And ultimately it led to them being able to tell their authentic story on their website, that differentiated them, that shared their DEI plan, what they learned about themselves during their assessments, and true employee stories. So it ultimately led into increased diversity hiring for them.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think given that 50% of the workforce are millennials and Gen Zers, and that percentage is obviously going to grow over time, that's increasingly candidates rate an organization's commitment to DEI so highly. And it's really important that organizations talk about what they're doing in this space on their website or social media.
Agreed. They want to see it. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about the connect phase and the employee engagement on the platform. Laura, you've talked a bit about this, but you also, I know you have a story about a manufacturing company that you've talked about before.
Yeah. Yeah, I was working with a manufacturing company, again, took them through Align, Connect, and Transform, and their employee population was really active on their culture app on our platform. There was great engagement on it. And then one day there was an anonymous post about somebody raised a discrimination incident they saw at one of their plants. The VP of HR immediately responded that they don't tolerate any discrimination in any way, shape, or form. But they came to me looking to, for advisement, because they were inclined to take it down and sort of quell these types of discussions. But I advised them to keep it up and use the opportunity to educate and inform. So they went back and actually responded to the post, the anonymous user letting them know that they appreciated that they brought it forward, and asked them to put it through their company channel, company hotline, and gave the website and phone number, to which the anonymous post user, responded that was very helpful and appreciated that information. So ultimately the company was really happy that they had this sort of safe environment for their internal communications, and it was able to raise these things up and use the opportunity to educate and inform and reiterate policies and communication channels, and that the employee didn't leave before they were able to sort of share this, or that they didn't post it to an external website like Glassdoor. So they were quite pleased with this engagement tool that fosters this safe discussion.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of our customers sort of talk about they already have Slack or Teams and they have discussions, but being able to report anonymously, I think, is so important.
Right. Slack is for work.
Right, exactly. So great. Erica, what about you? Any stories on the connect phase?
Yes. It's a similar situation with an anonymous post. An employee at a very conservative company, also manufacturing in the Midwest, they posted an anonymous post, and they were inquiring why the company did not have LGBTQ partner benefits. The CHRO contacted me because they weren't sure whether they should remove the post, leave it, address the situation. So I recommended that they just keep the post and just address it. So the company responded that it did have LGBTQ benefits for married couples, just like for straight couples, but the organization didn't cover partner benefits for straight or LGBTQ couples. So the company, after reading, after the company made that post, the employee actually responded to the post using their own name. So they were no longer anonymous, and they replied with their own name and thanked the company. So this was it was great. It caused a lot of positive reactions, responses from the company as a whole. And I actually reported that to our office as a cultural transformation in the company, because the company is very conservative. So that was a big win.
That's great. I love those stories of, the anonymous being able to speak about something that you may not normally be able to in a meeting, or even, with a meeting with your manager. So I think that's fantastic. Sorry, Laura, were you going to say something?
No, that's great. Agreed. Safe environment.
Right. So let's so that's sort of the connect phase, and using the employee engagement tool. And then we have the transform phase, which is really about ongoing monitoring of KPIs and that sort of stuff. So Erica, do you have a story about sort of that phase?
Yes. The HR director at the same company I was just talking about wanted to work with the organization to continue its focused effort on DEI, but they wanted to be able to convince the decision makers to keep getting funding, so they needed a business case. And at the same time, the company's talent acquisition manager was having a hard time hiring talent from different backgrounds and underrepresented communities. So I had to go in, and by reviewing the company's ATS data and our office hiring pipeline analytics, I was able to show them that their issue wasn't with the sourcing. There was a big pool of diverse candidates, and the interview slate was diverse as well. But the issue wasn't with that actually attracting the talent. The issue was at the hiring, at the interview phase. So I reviewed the interview process and the questions, and also the interview panel. And, I recommended some improvements, which resulted in more mid-manager diversity. So this led to, them being able to get their funding that they needed. So it's another big win.
Yeah, I love that. Sorry,
I love when data tells you the story, and, doing data applicant flow analysis really, can help uncover where there's opportunity.
Yes, exactly.
Data is my jam.
Yeah. And I also think that, there's a tendency to sort of think about executives, and then there's think about employees, but we forget about mid-managers, who are so important in organizations, and having that diversity and that sort of level of leadership. And so having that data in order to provide, that kind of insight is so important, and, at all levels of the organization. So.
I've got one where, data I love, because I was working with a defense contractor company who needed to focus on their DEI due to DoD focusing on supplier diversity. So they needed to, sort of improve mid-level management diverse representation, and they were having a hard time hiring, identifying and hiring them from externally. So using the platform and, really clean analytics, really, and looking at kind of all ways data can intersect with each other. And so once we layered performance ratings on with representation, we saw 60% of outstanding performers were women, but yet 30% were getting the promotions. So again, data uncovered this opportunity, and then they could focus on their internal promotion process, their succession planning program, and within 4 months, in a few short months, they had increased their mid-level representation by 4 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. Great. And I've got one sort of final story as well around that. And it's really around an organization who had kind of a lot of stuff in place already. So before they came to our office. So I'm working with a sort of mid-sized healthcare company who have a DEI leader. They had a DEI leader at the time as well. When they came to us, they had a DEI council, they had ERGs, but they weren't seeing the impact and the measurements. So when they came to our office, the DEI leader was frustrated and was burnt out, and there was, a lot of pressure from leadership in terms of expectations, what's going, what are the results. And so most of the DEI and also most of the DEI council members were not very active. The ERGs were doing lots of things, but we're not seeing, sort of progress and impact. So what we did is we conducted that first phase, the align phase, while integrating much of what they've done. So we took, a lot of the plan and, surveys and stuff that they'd already done, and then created sort of clearer objectives and put in some KPIs, and then launched the Our Office platform to engage everyone in that sort of communication sort of hub. But then what was critical is we also started measuring and tracking outcomes of the activities and the process improvements that we'd identified. And then they could then share that with senior leadership, which was hugely impactful. And I also enjoyed working as a sounding board, or I do enjoy working for a sounding board for the DEI leader to help flesh out future strategy and priorities. So a lot of companies come to us with, existing initiatives and existing infrastructure, but they just need help kind of with measurement at the end of the day.
Measurement and the hub that really creates a lot of engagement and energy in this space that then kind of bubbles up in throughout the organization.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Erica and Laura, for providing those stories. And that's really all we're going to talk about today, because we want to also look at and see if we've got any questions. I'm just going to put the slides back up here. So before we get to questions, and we're going to do that in just a second, I just want to tell you about our next webinar, which is a week today on October 28th at the same time. And it's dedicated to the third P, which is the technology platform, which we use for the transform phase and KPIs. We'll talk about why you need one, how to select one, and best practices for using platforms or tools. So please mark your calendars, because this has been a whole October of learning with this continuing webinar series. Also, remember, you can watch the recordings of all of our events at ouroffice.io/events. And then if you need to email us, if you have any questions or want to talk about your specific situation or DEI efforts with us, we're always happy to have a conversation. And please email us at dei@ouroffice.io. All right. So let's see if we have any questions. So let's go over here. We have a question about, could you go into what your culture app is and how it works? I can start with that, and then Laura and Erica, please jump in. So really the culture app is around, is an engagement tool for employees. And it's a bit like I don't really want to use the word social media because that puts some people off, but it's as easy to use as LinkedIn or Facebook. And it's about having a conversation. And it's for those employees. It's always an optional thing. It's not, we don't force employees to use it, but it's a way for employees to bring their whole selves to work and really talk about, things that are going on. So it could be related to DEI in the organization. It could be something they'd observed outside of the organization that's related to DEI. It could be anything around workplace culture. A lot of companies use the culture app to communicate their DEI plan and what's going on, and we've achieved this, or we're about to do this, or we're about to have a lunch and learn. So they use it as a communication mechanism from leadership or from the DEI leader. But it's a way for employees to just interact with each other. It's a web-based tool, so it's really easy to access. And they can just have conversations, and then they can react to things, they can like things. So it's very much, a bit like Facebook in that respect, and LinkedIn. Laura and Erica, do you want to add anything on that question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just consider it having sort of been in this space in large companies for most of my career. I mean, this is a perfect centralized hub to capture all this activity that's happening in this space. And it really lets employees know that their company is prioritizing and focusing on it. And it's awesome, sort of like Anushka said, very easy to share resources, best practices, We as DEI advisors go in and share those things. So, it kind of keeps the conversation going, and it just creates that great energy that you're looking for in this space.
I like the engagement, and a lot of my clients have told me that they really enjoy engaging with one another. Also, for people who are uncomfortable at first, there's a level of being anonymous, where you can post anonymous posts, and I also like the controls that the administrators have to maybe remove things that they might consider too inappropriate or risque. But it's the engagement for me. I love the engagement.
Yeah, it's got the profanity or mechanism too, so it already sort of fields a lot for you.
Right.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that we've heard from customers is, if you have this sort of tool as you're onboarding people, or you're attracting candidates to your organization, or you're onboarding them, having that, so talking about the fact that you have got an engagement tool around to talk about stuff around workplace culture and DEI is so powerful, because it just sends a message. We take this seriously. We want to hear from our employees. We're not scared to hear from our employees. And so we want to have two-way conversations. So it's great to include in your sort of onboarding process to introduce that person to the tool. The other thing that I just want to mention really quickly is we always encourage leaders to use it too. So it's like this is a CEO effect. So if a CEO post something on the culture app, the engagement by the rest of the organization exponentially increases, and it kind of stays up there, because they think, right, this is, the CEO really cares and really wants to hear from us, and so it just increases engagement. So we always encourage leadership to use it as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. It's a great differentiator.
Yeah. We've also got a question on ERGs. Would you recommend them? I'm going to hand this over first to Erica, because you've got a lot of experience in this. So.
I would definitely recommend them, just for the obvious reasons, for the employee engagement, to create like an inclusive environment, professional development, because it gives the opportunity, employees the opportunity to develop skills and, leadership, and have, different organizational responsibilities and mentorship, but also for business innovation, because sometimes, in the employee resource groups, it allows people to usually interact when they don't usually do so. And sometimes in larger organizations, because of your position, you're busy and you're only in your own little bubble, and you don't really interact with some, other employees from different departments, or, do different jobs. So it kind of gives you an opportunity to really engage with others and kind of share ideas and, innovation. Mm-hmm. Normally you wouldn't probably have that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a lot of passion in this space. There should be, finally. And employees, candidates and employees want to know their company places priority on it. And it's just great channels to leverage some of that energy at the base that
generate new ideas. Yes.
Yeah. And I think, I would only add that there are risks. There's always risks with doing any DEI initiative. And the only thing I would say is to ensure that the ERGs are thought through. So there's a policy around it. It's tied to whatever, DEI or business objectives that you have. And, you have goals and, for that and stuff that you can track, because if you don't do that, if you don't have structure around it, you might end up risking sort of having just the loudest voices, being on these ERGs.
Right.
And so it's really around, doing it, planning it properly, making sure that you've got a good cross section of, people joining, and then having those sort of goals and tracking those over time, so that you're not just sort of, getting together for the sake of it. So.
Right.
We got one final question that just came to us, which is around the listening sessions that we do, and do we use standard questions for the listening sessions? And that's when we sort of in the align phase, when we talk to employees, and it's like a focus group, we get feedback, we do have standard questions, because we want to sort of make sure that we're consistent across each of the listening sessions. We'll do a couple of per customer, but we also make sure that we do the listening sessions after we've done the employee survey, because if there's things that have come out from the survey that are, particularly highlighted, we might dig deeper as people talk about that. So we might sort of focus a little bit more and ask sort of more follow-up questions or leading questions on that. So yeah, standardized, but we also have taken into account what we've heard and understood from the employee survey. I don't know if you guys want to add.
Yeah, I mean, conversational, definitely, standard, but they're listening sessions. So we also listen and take the conversation where the employees want to focus as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And then we just got a quick question about the replay. Is our replay available? Absolutely. So we'll be sending the replay out in the next sort of either tomorrow or Monday at the latest to all the people that registered for the webinar. And it will also be on our events page at ouroffice.io/events. So, well, I think that's it for questions, and we're right about a few minutes from time. So I think this is a good time to end the webinar. Laura and Erica, I really want to thank you for taking the time today to share your experiences. And thank you all for attending the webinar. And we look forward to seeing you next week at the same time for the platform webinar. Have a good day, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.